Welcome, everyone in the United States, Canada, and around the world to another episode of It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast of overcomers and the podcast of useful information to better our daily life and mental spirit. I am your host, Ron Rappaport. Let me start out by thanking all our great listeners, viewers, supporters, and sponsors for helping to make this podcast such a success. We are being heard on all major platforms, and the podcast website it's a wrap with rap.com. You can find all the episodes, previews of future episodes, and great products and services offered from our sponsors on the website. My guest today is James Dorsey from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. James is the author of Delinquent, a true story about homelessness, foster care, and addiction, released in May 2024. James was placed in foster care against his will in the 1990s at age 12. Rather than go into foster care, he chose to run away and live on the streets. James is here with us today to tell his story, how this young, kind Canadian boy became enmeshed in the harsh culture of living on the streets, and to also discuss with us his thoughts about how this narrative plays out with so many of our youth and his thoughts on how parents and guardians can deal with the issue if affected by it. Welcome, James, to the podcast. I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I find this a really interesting topic, and I will, just like I told James a few minutes ago, his book is great. I couldn't even put it down. I just stayed up and just read the whole thing. Now, I would like to start off discussing your story and then move on to discuss how parents and guardians can better cope and hopefully help our youth that is troubled by homelessness, drug addiction, and an inability to adapt to a lifestyle free of addiction and making poor life choices. Let's start at the beginning. You were born in Edmonton, Alberta, and then you moved to Vancouver and then to Victoria, B.C. Tell us about your family life up until age 6.
So my mom was a single mom. My dad, when my mom told my dad that he was pregnant with me, he informed her that he was actually already married and had 2 teenage kids in Ontario. So that relationship ended pretty quickly after that. So I was raised by a single mom, and things were pretty normal until I was about 6. And then my mom met my brother's dad, and shortly after that, my brother came into the picture. And I don't know for sure, but I believe that my mom she already had some mental health issues. Were sort of below the surface, but I believe that after the birth of my brother, she developed postpartum depression, and I think her she's bipolar, and I believe that her bipolar really just sort of kicked in around that time. So things really started to deteriorate quickly when I was about 6. Um, I got in a lot of trouble at school. I got caught shoplifting a couple times when I was 6, and again when I was 8. I was always in trouble at home. My mom, her way of her method of parenting, she parented from a place of anger, not understanding and compassion, and that didn't really work with me. I was always sort of a mischievous kid, and so I started rebelling against her very quickly. And so things were, from the age of 6 till 12, they just started, they got worse and worse to the point where when I was 12, eventually they just bubbled over, and she kicked me out.
Now, let's go back a little bit. Your mother meets a man and she gives birth to your brother. What impact did that situation have on your relationship with her?
I definitely resented it. I mean, I'm 6. I don't. It's really hard to process stuff like that when you're 6.
Yeah.
So I think I looked at it as, here's this guy coming in, and he's trying to take my place, or he's trying to steal some of my mom away from me, right? So I never took to him. I never got along with him. And I mean, that definitely played a factor as well, right? So I think I was frustrated with the situation, and then when her mental health deteriorated, things just sort of like the perfect storm.
So at age 12, while going through therapy, because I believe she sent you to some sort of mental therapy, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Psychologist or whatever. Uh, you tell the child psychiatrist it may be a good idea to live somewhere else other than your house, your home. Tell us what reaction your mother had upon hearing that from the doctor.
yeah. So we've been seeing a child psychiatrist for quite some time, and the way we did it was I would go see him first, and he would talk to me about how things were going, and then my mom would go in after, and he'd talk to her, and sometimes he'd join us together for a bit. So this particular day, things had been going really bad for the last few weeks, and I was frustrated. Like my mom was constantly angry with me, and I wasn't happy. So I told the child psychiatrist, I don't know if I should live at home anymore. She doesn't seem like she even likes me. She's always angry. It's just not working. And so my mom went in after, and I was sitting out in the waiting room. And as soon as she opened the door and came out after her part of the session, I could tell by the look on her face that he had told her. And so I followed her down to the car, and I could feel her anger in the elevator on the way down to the car. Like it was like a third passenger in the elevator with us.
Yeah.
And when we got down to the car, she said, "So you don't want to live at home? Well, you're going to foster care."
I'm sorry, you're breaking
And
up. James, you're breaking up a little bit.
oh, am I good? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So she said, "Oh, so you don't like living at home? Well, you're going to foster care." And I I begged and pleaded with her not to send me to foster care. I explained that, I didn't mean it. I didn't say I wanted to move out. I said I didn't know if I should live at home anymore. I was frustrated, just sort of venting to the psychiatrist,
Yeah.
and she stood firm, and she we got home, and she said, "Pack your stuff up. I'm going to call social services, and you're going to foster care." And so in my head, um, I pictured foster care being probably like what an orphanage would have been like back in the early 1900s, like a big gymnasium with bunk
Oh,
beds with all the big kids beating on the little kids and taking their food. Um, so I wasn't having any of that. So
hey,
I decided,
I just
sorry,
curious, did she ever threaten you with foster care before that?
no, no, I don't even know how I knew what foster care was. I guess I'd heard of it, around the way or whatever, but
Yeah.
no, this was never anything that was ever spoken of before that. So
So when she
it was,
mentioned it, it was really like kind of a shock,
oh yeah,
like,
yeah, it was very
yeah,
shocking.
where did she come up with foster? Okay, okay, so that in my mind, I mean, it almost looking back at it, that psychiatrist probably should never have said that to her, you
Oh,
know?
definitely not. Yeah, it definitely wasn't handled tactfully at all. Because I mean, the outcome was me running away and living on the streets, right? There was definitely better ways that could have been dealt with. So,
Right. Now, instead of waiting around to be taken to foster care, you get a hold of a friend. I think it was one of I think it was a girl who
yep.
advises you to go downtown and meet her friend there instead of going to foster care. Tell us what those initial and ensuing days were like for a small 12-year-old starting out naively living on the streets and your introduction to cigarettes, marijuana, and alcohol.
Yeah. So, um, it was a complete shock to me. I up until this point, I'd been in a little bit of trouble at school, and but I'd never tried cigarettes. I never tried marijuana. I'd never tried alcohol. I was very sheltered. I didn't even really go out much outside of going to school because I was usually grounded or whatever. And so I really was very, very sheltered at the time. But I went to my friend's house when I ran away, and she was sort of the older girl who, hung out with older boys and had smoked a cigarette or two, like the older, cooler girl that I knew. Um, so she called her friend, and he offered to take me under his wing, and he hung out downtown. So I hopped on a bus for my first time ever being on a bus alone. So I bussed downtown, which is about a half-hour bus ride. Met up with him, and he had a few friends with him. And within, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of being on the streets, they'd offered me cigarettes and weed. And it was it was scary, but it was exciting at the same time. Being you know, being under the sort of tyrannical rule of my mother for so long, to be free from that was it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. So I while it was a bit scary, I was more, I think, excited than anything else. And I was really too young and naive to know how dangerous a situation I put myself in, right? Like anything could have happened to me downtown at any point.
Yeah.
Um, but it didn't, obviously. So for the next few days, I just lived on the streets, and the people that I met, um, uh, three of them lived on the streets full time. They were a few years older than me, 14, 15 for the most part. So they carried around a sleeping bag and a backpack full of their stuff, and they spent their days, panhandling, trying to get money, trying to get food, trying to get cigarettes, trying to get weed. And we just sort of do that all day, hang out until, we got tired, and then find somewhere to sleep that was undercover. So, sleeping under bridges, sleeping in the ATM booth of a bank, if we could get our way in there, sleeping in abandoned buildings. Yeah, so it was definitely interesting, and um, yeah, to me it just felt like an adventure, I guess, at the time.
Did that kind of lifestyle make it, did it feel like you were close knit, like almost like a new family type thing? I mean,
Yeah,
because you're
absolutely.
coming from a mother who's very strict, and obviously
Yeah,
you're not having a good time, and now you're meeting these people, and they're treating you nice, you know.
yeah, absolutely. It was, within a couple hours of being downtown, I had already decided, this is my new family, this is my new life. And it was just that freedom and that feeling of acceptance from people down there was addictive. As you say, after such a juxtaposition of how I grew up and what I dealt with at home, right?
Right. Now, t tell us about your school life during these times. What was that like?
Like up until I ran away.
Yeah.
School was always a bit challenging for me. I believe that I'm undiagnosed ADHD because I've my entire life I've had a very hard time sitting still in class. So I think it was about grade 2 or 3 I first started having issues at school, and um, I was sort of the class clown in school. I was the guy that was always, you know, chucking things at people when the teacher wasn't looking and saying little smart ass comments. Um, so, and I'd been suspended, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 times up to this point, and asked not to return to a couple schools as well. So school uh, was not much better than at home, really.
Now tell us about the violence and other dangers that occur living the street lifestyle.
Yeah. So for the first, couple of months, I didn't really see too much. I mean, the people that I met really took me under their wing, and they told me how things worked, and they sort of let me know who to steer clear of, and stuff like that. So for the first little bit, I felt pretty safe, but um, you know, I ended up I don't know how long I'd been downtown for, but I ended up meeting a uh, pimp and his two girls at about 2 in the morning at a all night coffee shop. And I was 12. I was very small, very skinny, very cute. I was always told by adults and older people. So when this pimp and his girls saw me sitting in a coffee shop at 2 in the morning,
But sorry,
smoking cigarettes.
uh repeat that again. We didn't I didn't catch it in the mic.
Okay. Um, so when this pimp and his girls saw me, this little cute 12-year-old smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee at a coffee shop at 2 in the morning, they decided to take me under their wing. and I ended up staying with them for a little bit. Again, I'm 12, I'm naive, I don't know when I first start
Sure.
talking to them that he's a pimp, and turns out he was a coke dealer as well. But um, not long after I started staying with them, um, I had met this other guy, and he offered me a job. He was, I can't remember, he was maybe in his early 20s, late teens. He offered me a job, and I was really excited about it because I'd be getting money and I wouldn't have to panhandle anymore. And we met up one day to talk about it, and he out of nowhere reached over and he put his hand on my private parts.
Yeah.
And I, without even thinking, I got up and slapped him and ran away. And so I found the guy that I was living with, the pimp, and I told him what had happened. And he was with another friend, and we found the guy. I didn't even really know when they said they wanted to look for him, like the extent of what was about to happen. I knew he was in trouble, but I'd never seen any violence in my life other than what I saw on TV, right? So when they found him, they beat him very badly, and it was quite traumatizing. Um, so that was my first real run-in with violence on the streets, and there was a few other instances after that where I was involved in stuff, but I still, once I was exposed to it and I saw it, it sort of tainted this little this image that I had of what living on the streets was like. It sort of, added a little splash of danger to it, but it still didn't deter me from being down there because when you're young, you're invincible, right? And nothing had happened to me, so as long as I played my cards right, I'd be fine in my mind, right?
Well, my one of my questions that just popped up in my head is, so you're downtown, you're not at home, you're not in foster care. What's mother doing? Is she looking for you?
Yeah, so I the police were looking for me the entire time I was downtown. So it varied, but every week or two, or sometimes every few days, the police would find me, and they would take me back to the police station. They'd throw me in a cell for however many hours it took to figure out where they needed to take me, and then they take me to a foster home. So I think I was on the streets for, I don't know, it was maybe about 2 weeks before the police caught me the first time and took me to a foster home. So I sat in a cell for several hours. They threw me in a car, took me to this home, and I met the foster parents, and they were really friendly. They were really nice. I got to sleep in a warm bed that night, which was nice. Had a shower, changed my clothes, and then as soon as I'd done that, I left because I just wanted to be on the streets with my new family, right?
Right.
Um, so my mom, I didn't see my mom for quite some time after I ran away, but she was worried about me, and she was talking to social workers, and everybody was looking for me, trying to find me, but I was doing my best not to be found.
You were pretty elusive, yeah.
I tried.
Like you say, you bounce from several foster homes and schools, and you end up in jail many times for being involved in various crimes. And some of these crimes that you talk about is stealing, auto theft, burglary, fencing stolen property, assault alone and in the company of your friends. Why do you think you constantly cave to peer pressure, knowing you would probably be caught by the police? And tell us the power of your addiction to the weed, to the cigarettes, and the instant gratification of stealing.
That's exactly what it is. It's, for the first, it was, I think I was on the streets for maybe 6, 7 months before uh, doing crime became a thing. I ended up meeting some kids that they were breaking into cars, and that's sort of how it started. And then it just kept escalating from there. And it's, after the first time I was arrested and put in juvie, I was there for about a month and a half. I swore to myself when I got out I would never go back. And every time after that I got arrested and went to juvie, I came out and I was so determined not to go back. But the it's that instant gratification that it's addictive. It's being a teenager and being able to go out and just get whatever I want, cost not being an issue, not having to work for it. Just I want it, I go get it. That's very addictive. More addictive than more powerful than my desire to stay free, right?
Yeah.
So I struggled with that from, age 12 till I was about 16. I was in and out of juvie. I take one step forward, two steps back, and peer pressure was a huge part of it too, because usually the kids I hung out with were a bit older than me. So, I always had this need to, kind of impress them, and when you're hanging out with kids who, impressing them is breaking into a house or something like that, it's hard to say no, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Now, looking back, you said the most defining moment of your life was the day you ran away to avoid foster care and not accept it. If you had accepted it or never been placed in it by your mother initially, uh, that you would have been a different person today. What did you mean by that?
well, I think the trajectory of my life changed dramatically that day. I went from, a sheltered kid to, a drug addict and a criminal in due time, right?
Yeah.
I think, if I had stayed at home, or if I hadn't run away and I'd gone to a foster home, maybe I never would have gone downtown. Maybe I never would have started smoking weed. It's like it's like that one decision just set me on a completely different path than I maybe ever would have been on. And I don't think, one of the themes in my book, and one of the things I had to realize in order to start making some changes, was that you know, I'm not the kind of person that, like, I'm not a violent person. I'm not an aggressive person. I have a lot of compassion for people, and those aren't really traits that are, they don't last long in the criminal world, right? So it took me 4 years to figure that out. But I think if I wasn't introduced to all those things on that day, um, you know, we probably wouldn't be talking right now, and I'd be a completely different person and
Yeah.
not have been through all the things I've been through.
Makes sense. Now, what programs did the court order for you to straighten you out, and were they effective at all, or were they just a waste of time?
So aside from juvie, I mean, there was a lot of different programs that the justice system would try to use to keep kids out of juvie. One of them was called Coastline Challenges. So it's a 26-day, like, outward bound sort of program where you basically get up super early every morning. You go for runs. You do 3-4 day hiking trips, 3-4 day canoeing trips. You have to do a 5K run halfway through and a 10K run at the end in a certain amount of time, or else you can't graduate. Um, I did that program three separate times, spread out over about 3 years, and that by far was my favorite program. That it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but um, it was interesting because I was first sentenced to that program when I was 12, and I absolutely hated it. I was very skinny and little when I was 12, and like they'd make us we had to carry these big, I don't know how big they were, but these big, like, full size camping backpacks. And I remember being 12, I couldn't even stand up with this backpack on me.
Yeah.
Like, I had to get somebody to pull me up. It must have weighed almost as much as I did. So I hated it the first time. I think I went back when I was 14, and I was a bit older, a bit stronger. I'd done it once, so I kind of had a bit of experience. So I liked it a bit more. And then by the third time I did it, I actually liked it. If I'd had all my friends from the street with me in the program, I probably would have had a blast the whole time. Um, so that was my favorite program. Another program was called Wiseman House. It's basically like it's sort of like a group home. It was in a different city. It was in Nanaimo, which is about an hour and a half north of Victoria. Um, it's like a group home, but you're on house arrest, so you're not allowed to leave, and you had to earn points to get to level 4, and then once you got to level 4, you had graduated and you would get released. Um, so typically the program takes about 4 months if you're doing what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to, just teach you how to behave appropriately, I guess. Um, Unfortunately, I didn't do so well in that program, and I ended up after about 6 months of being there, I was asked to leave, so I didn't do too well in that one. But um, and then there was a few other programs that wasn't sent to. But there was in the 90s there was lots of different alternatives to sending kids to juvie.
So you bounce back and forth through foster care and the justice system, each time vowing to do better, but you don't. You repeat the same actions, the smoking, the weed, drinking alcohol, and doing illegal acts. Now, looking back, do you now feel the whole system, the court system, the foster care system, failed you by not monitoring you close enough and not guiding you in the right direction? Or was this all on you until the time you decided to leave that lifestyle?
I think for the most part it's on me. I mean, you know, being a foster parent now, I I I have teenage boys, and a lot of them are doing similar stuff to what I was doing, and you can't ultimately there's not a lot I can do or the justice system can do to make someone change. You can't make someone change unless they want to change.
Right.
And until I was about 16, I didn't want to change. I didn't I mean, I guess a part of me did, but I wasn't ready to change. There was no shortage of counselors, social workers, probation officers that tried to help me, but I wasn't hearing it. Like, I would say that I would say the right things to make them think that I cared, and then as soon as they were gone, I would do whatever I wanted.
Right.
So it was definitely on me, 100%.
Now, at what point in this journey and how old were you at the time did you turn the corner and decide this lifestyle was no longer for you as compared to other people's normal life? Uh, when did that happen?
So when I was 16, on my 16th birthday, actually, I was sentenced to 4 months in open custody. So up until then, in Victoria, there's a youth custody center. I'd always been there, and I knew all the staff there after years of going there. I always knew at least a handful of kids there. So, it sucked not being free, but at the same time, I don't want to say comfortable there, but I understand it, and there is a certain level of comfort there. On my 16th birthday, my mom actually stood up in court, and before I say that, I should say it's my 16th birthday. So being 16, I think I'm getting out because it's my birthday. Obviously, they can't sentence me to more time on my birthday because that just wouldn't be fair, right?
Yeah, right.
So my mom stood up in court, and I hadn't seen her for over a year at this point, I think. She stood up in court and she told the judge basically my child needs to be locked up. He's going to end up dead or hurting somebody. He needs to be locked up. And as soon as she said that, I felt all the blood run from my body. I knew for sure I was not getting out. And so I was sentenced to 4 months in open custody. And that's about half an hour north of Campbell Rivers, about maybe 3-4 hours from Victoria. Uh, so I was, it was after being sentenced to that where I was like, okay, like that was the longest I'd been in juvie up till that point was about 2 months. So when you're 16, 4 months is like, 4 years would be to me now.
Right.
Um, so I was pissed off. I was terrified. Um, and about 2 days after that, I was in the sheriff's van driving, up to open custody. So I was in the sheriff's van. There's a big cage in the front of the van, just behind the drivers, and then there's two smaller cages behind that. I was by myself in one of the smaller cages, and in the big cage there was two adults being transported up to somewhere in Nanaimo, I think. And I just remember sitting there and listening to them because I had nothing better to do. There was nobody for me to talk to, so I was just sitting there listening to them and sort of sneaking glances at them, and they looked like drug addicts and career criminals. They were, I don't know, they're probably in their 30s. They're a bunch of tattoos, looked like they, hadn't had a good meal or a good sleep in a long time. And they were just going back and forth boasting about, crimes they'd done and people they beat up and stuff like that. And I had this I guess what Oprah would call like an aha moment where it hit me. It was like the most clear thought I'd ever had in my life. I'm gonna end up just like these people if I don't figure something out. And as soon as I had that thought, it was like a reel played in my mind of all the stupid things I'd done and all the people I'd hurt and all the mistakes I'd made. And I spent the rest of the drive up to Campbell River just trying to process this information. And by the time I got to Campbell River, I'd made a decision that, you know what, I like it's now or never. If I don't make some changes now, I'm never going to get out of this. So that was sort of day one where and I still had a 4 month sentence to do. So but throughout that 4 month sentence, my resolve didn't deteriorate at all. So when I got out, I I changed all my friends because that I couldn't be friends with the same people and not get into the stuff they were getting into.
Right.
So that was sort of that was the beginning of my journey towards becoming, you know, normal. But by no means was the end anywhere near in sight because I didn't want to be a criminal and I didn't want to go to jail ever again, but I I didn't know where I fit in the world because like who can I hang out with that can relate to the things I've been through, you know, that's going to be a good influence on me at the same time, right? Like most
Yeah.
16-year-olds that don't do drugs and do crime are, you know, they're thinking about prom and going to soccer practice. I can't relate to those things, right? So I was, you know, for a good year or so, you know, I made some friends and um eventually, but I was lost. I was trying to figure out my place in the world. So eventually when I was 17, I had just started getting I'd gotten my first job. I'd actually moved out on my own for the first time. The social services has this thing called independent living where they'll pay your rent for you and give you like a monthly stipend if you're mature and responsible enough. And I had accomplished that. So 17, I'm living on my own. I had my first job. Things were starting to go really well for me. Unfortunately, I was introduced to crystal meth by a friend that I made, and this started uh, the second uh, stint of adversity that I had to overcome. It wasn't long before I was addicted to crystal meth, and that was I was actually addicted to it twice from the age of 17 to 21. So yeah, I had to go through that, but I managed to overcome that as well. And I should mention that this story, everything I'm talking about with meth addiction and stuff, that's I plan on writing a second book that goes into detail about all that part of my life. Um, but yeah, I had to the second time quit crystal meth. It was pretty much the same thing as when I was 16 and I got out of juvie. I had to change all my friends and and it was the same thing where I was like, you know, if I don't stop this now, I'm going to end up just, you know, being a junkie, and I don't want to do that, right? So
Right. Right.
um, it was
Yeah, it's tough to get out of that cycle.
yeah, no,
Definitely.
it's absolutely it's a lot easier to let your adversity define you and let it overcome you than to make a stand against it. And you know, not a lot of people can do that, right? Especially with meth ruins a lot of lives. So I feel
It's highly addictive, right?
yeah, oh, it's horrible.
And I know
So yeah, it's
it makes your teeth crumble and just, I
yeah,
mean, you look like hell. You know, I've seen pictures of people
yeah,
on it. It's horrible. Uh, and of course, this is kind of new to me because this was not in the book and that I read. And so I guess there's going to be a sequel.
yeah. I
And
and I originally only wanted to write one book, but uh, you know, the level of detail that I wanted to go into, I realized pretty quickly writing my first book that, you know, if to fit my whole story into one book, it was going to be like an encyclopedia, right? So
right.
I decided to break it up into two, and it works because I look at my teenage years in two sections. There's sort of the delinquent years, and then there's the addict years. Is sort of the way I remember them, right? So it kind of fits.
So, James, what's your relationship now with your mother? I know you learned she was bipolar at age 20 when you were 20.
Yeah,
What's your relationship with her now?
it's good. you know, she's she's sort of managed to come to terms with a lot of her stuff. I think she's also a lot of the issue when I from 6 to 12 was I think my mom trying to figure out what medication helps keep her balanced. So she's been on medication that helps her for quite some time now. We still have our challenges, and she's uh, we we still have challenges quite a bit. But you know, me being for one not living with her is huge. But
Yeah,
also, I'm aware that she has the challenges she has. So, you know, being informed on that, when things start, getting a little tense between us, I'm big enough and mature enough that I know when it's time to just sort of step back and give her some space kind of thing. So,
right.
um, but yeah, no, things are fine between us now.
So what, in your opinion, now that you are a parent, can parents do with troubled children to prevent them from going off the deep end? Does it start at an early age, in your opinion?
I mean, so being a foster parent, I've been a foster parent now for about 13 years. I foster teenage boys, usually from age 12 till 18. So I've had many teenagers come through my house over the 13 years, and it's really different for everybody. It seems like you can have a boy with parents that are still together, and they appear successful and loving, but the kid just goes off the rails. And then you can have a kid, parents are addicts and living on the streets, and he still gets up and goes to high school every day. So there's no one answer to that question, really. I think me as a foster parent, I my main focus is just establishing a relationship with the kids in my house. So I sometimes think of myself more as like a big brother than a dad, because I'm not super old and I'm not super young either. I'm kind of big brother age almost. But I like to, having never had a dad, I think I try to do a lot of sort of dad things with them. Like I really enjoy, playing catch and going to the pool and going to the lake and playing video games with them and just doing stuff like that with them. And I think just having, just trying to have a strong relationship with your kids, and trying to not, be judgmental towards them. If they do start getting into stuff, like I know from experience that coming at a kid with anger is not going to get you anywhere. That's just going to get their back up against the wall, and things are going to escalate, right? So I always try to keep things light, and even if I start getting frustrated, or I have a kid that's not listening to me or whatever, like and just be really patient with them. I never raise my voice. That's a big trigger for me because my mom used to she was always very angry, as I said, when she parented, and so she would yell and stuff like that. So that's a trigger for me. So I try to be everything that I kind of wished I had when I was younger, I guess. So
Yeah, that sounds good. Now, you said that your dream one day was to work with at-risk youth, but you got sidetracked and you did a carpentry apprenticeship, but you suffered an accident. Tell us what followed that and how you entered the career of working in foster care.
yeah, so I'm I, I don't know that I necessarily believe in fate, or things are meant to be a certain way, but you know it's kind of hard to look back on how I got into this and not sort of wonder if maybe there was somebody sort of guiding me, because I was I was 25. When I was about 17, I decided I wanted to work with kids, but all I knew was that I could be a social worker, and you have to go to school for 4 years for that. And as I said before, me and school weren't really on great terms. So it was easier to get into the trades. So I started doing carpentry, and I loved it. So started doing my carpentry apprenticeship, and I was actually painting my mom's house on the weekends for her. And I was 2 stories up on a ladder, and the ladder I was on a stepped ceiling, so the ceiling kind of came down like this. and the ladder was resting on the top step, and it slipped off, and so I just went flying down on the ground, and I landed on my hand, and I shattered my wrist when I sort of looked at my hand after I had fallen. I basically had like an extra. I had two wrists instead of one, um, and I tried to get up and came crashing back down because I my wrist was so bad I didn't realize that I'd actually broken my pelvis as well.
Wow.
So I ended up having to. They had to do surgery on my wrist. I had shattered the tips of both bones. So instead of two bones in there, I had 27. The surgeon actually said it was one of the worst breaks he'd ever seen. Um, so for about 6 months, I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything. Um, I actually tried to go back to carpentry towards the end of that 6 month period and just work one handed. That didn't last long. It turns out my wrist, um, it's not at full capacity still, even just because of the severity of the break. So I couldn't do carpentry anymore because of the injury. Um, so the government actually has had a retraining program. So they actually paid for me to go to school and for my living expenses. And I went to this like job skills place where they help you find work or whatever. And I sat down with them, and they're like, "Well, what else do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I've always wanted to work with kids." And next thing you know, I'm registered for a 1 year community support worker certificate course. And within about, I think, 2 or 3 months of that, I was actually going to school. And within about 6 months of starting school, I'd started working in a foster home, and the rest, as they say, is history. So it if it wasn't that, that was another moment in my life where the trajectory was drastically changed, because if I hadn't fallen off that ladder, I don't know that I ever would have started doing what I'm doing now. So it's kind of makes you wonder.
For one thing, I always say, don't ask, why is this happening to me? Ask, why is this happening for me? Take that
Yeah,
approach.
that's very true, because every bad thing that has ever happened to me in my life, looking back on it, it wasn't a bad thing in the end. It was like, and I don't like talking like this because I don't necessarily believe in this stuff, but it's almost like the universe kind of stepping in and just giving you a nudge in the right direction, right? So
Yeah, I know you don't like talking about it, but I think, just take my word for it. The older you get, you'll think differently.
yeah,
That's just
it's
my
already starting to
opinion.
happen. I'm fighting it every step of the way though.
So you're a foster parent for 13 years now, and you opened your own home for teenage boys. Tell us how that's going, and what have you learned from it about the problem, and how does your past affect you as being a foster parent? Do you lean on the past uh, for answers, or doesn't it matter at all?
So it's been very interesting. I think being a foster parent has helped me process a lot of the stuff I went through in a lot of ways. Like, I look back at the decisions I made now, and I can't believe some of the things I did. Like, I'm such a different person than I was when I was a teenager. Um, I don't a lot of the kids, I don't necessarily tell the kids as soon as they move in, like, I was in foster care too. It sort of comes up organically for the most part. And a lot of the kids, I've had kids that don't believe me that I was in foster care. They think I'm just saying that to, try to connect with them or whatever. Um, but it's impossible not to if I have a boy that reminds me a lot of me when I was a teenager, it's hard not to see the parallels there, and try to think like, okay, so what did people try for me, and what worked and what didn't work, kind of thing, right?
Right.
um but it's honestly, working with teenagers and being a foster parent, it's one of the few things that I could do with my life, that where all the bad decisions I made as a teenager are actually good, and actually help me be a better foster parent, right? um so it's honestly, I don't, I couldn't imagine not being a foster parent. Um, there's a lot of sacrifices you have to make. Obviously, I don't have any kids of my own, so when I get off work, instead of going home and cracking a beer and kicking my feet up, I'm dealing with the kids and making dinner for them and stuff like that. But I don't uh, I don't regret it at all, and I think establishing those connections with them is, when a kid moves in and I can see our relationship starting to build. I mean, you can't put a price on that. It's a great feeling, and having it, knowing that, teenagers don't ever come out and say, like, thank you, like, you're really helping me. But you can tell when you have a good relationship with a teenager that, even if they don't know it, you're impacting them in some way, right? And I
Right.
think uh, I think that's huge. It's a great feeling.
Well, this might be a hard one to answer, but what has been your proudest moment as a foster parent?
That's actually easy to answer.
Okay.
I uh, I had a boy move in with me. I don't know. I think he was maybe 15, 16 when he moved in. Uh, I soon discovered that he was addicted to meth and using opiates as well. So pretty dangerous stuff. And of all the kids I had, I think he probably reminded me of me the most. I got along well with him right away. But so over the course of, I think he was with me for about 2.5 years. Um, he he went, like some of the lowest lows I've seen with any of my kids, like, up for days doing drugs, missing for days on end, kind of thing. Eventually, we got him into rehab, and he ended up completing a 4-month rehab program. And by the time he left, he was enrolled in a college welding course, and he actually moved out to move in to a basement suite with his girlfriend. So when he was 19, so I think he'd been moved out for a couple years. Uh, he randomly called me a couple weeks before Christmas, and he just said, "Hey, you want to meet up for a beer?" And I was like, "What are you? You're an adult now?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm 19." And like the whole idea of having a beer with a kid that used to be a teenager was kind of weird for me. But he was 19, so I met him for a beer, and we had a couple beers, and actually he actually told me that, he's like, I just want you to know that, you probably saved my life. Like, if you hadn't been there supporting me, and helped me get out of the place I was in, I don't know where I'd be right now." And that, like, I could foster for 100 years, and at least I know that for him, right? So
Yeah,
that by far is my proudest
that's
moment.
awesome. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Let's focus on your book now, titled Delinquent, a true story about homelessness, foster care, and addiction. Why did you write the book, making yourself vulnerable, and what do you expect the reader to get out of reading the book?
Yeah, so I've actually, I think I was 17 the first time I decided I wanted to write a book. It was always sort of, it was something I thought of when I was 17, and I knew I really wanted to do it. I've always been a big reader, my whole life. When I was a kid, I read a lot. Um, but it's one of those things. It's really easy to put on the back burner and put off. So I put it off for, about 25 years, and I don't know if it was my version of a midlife crisis or what, but I just woke up one day about a year ago, and I was like, if I don't start writing this thing now, I'm never going to do it. So that day I sat down, and I didn't, I didn't do an outline or any notes or anything. I was just like, no, I started writing it. And once I started writing, it was like, it was all I thought about. I couldn't believe how it was like my story wanted to get out of me onto the keyboard. Um, so so first answer is wanted to do it for a long time. Um, what I hope is that, uh, youth that are going through similar things to what I went through, I hope that they stumble across my book and read it and see that, you know there there's another way, and there is hope. Like, you don't have to keep going down this road. You can change course anytime you want. Um, my other hope is that, people that work with youth, um, who are having challenges, parents, teachers, social workers, they can read the book. And I've written it from my perspective at the time as the story's being told. So I really had to go back and sort of try to remember what my motivations and my thought processes were. But I think it can be an interesting read for parents to help them, see what their teenagers are thinking when they're making similar decisions, right?
Right, right. Tell us where the book can be purchased.
It's on Amazon,
Okay.
self-published.
All right. So everybody can purchase the book on Amazon. So tell me, James, what's next for James Dorsey? What do you think is next?
Well, just I'm definitely going to keep fostering. As I mentioned, I'm starting my second book in October, so hopefully have that out, by this time next year. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
So if people want to contact you, how can they do it?
They can contact me on Instagram.
All right. What's your Instagram label address?
It's a good question. I think it's James Dorsey 13.
James Dorsey 13. Okay. And any website or anything going on yet?
No, that's in the works. I hope to have a website up and running soon.
Okay. So Instagram would be the way to go
Yeah,
if they have questions. Okay. I'm going to include that in the podcast notes. Uh, last thing. What is your message for those parents and guardians listening, going through tough times with their kids? What advice do you have for them?
just to be patient and and hang in there. Um, keep the relationship open and you know that's really it. That's really all you can do.
Keep that relationship open. Don't close it for sure. I want to thank you, James, for coming on the podcast. It was great talking with you about this important issue. I want you to please come back when that next book gets released. And once again,
Absolutely.
thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Comments and suggestions for the audience, you can email me at it's a wrap with rap@gmail.com. Facebook, it's a wrap with rap. We have a Facebook group. We have about 2,000 people in there. Instagram, it's a wrap with rap podcast. X or Twitter, now it's known as X at rapper, WRAPPER 130. And our website is it's a wrap with rap.com. All the episodes are on YouTube. The YouTube channel is It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast uncut. I want to thank everyone for listening. Please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap.